Hi, and welcome to the second part of the lectures on population. Here we're going to be looking at issues involved with demographic changes, so problems that might sprout up as the population structure changes, or also descriptions of that change. The first set of problems happens when a country or an area is in the part of the demographic transition that involves rapid population growth. You might have a shortage of different resources. Hunger could be a very big problem, especially because the countries that are increasing their population the most quickly usually haven't achieved a high level of economic development, so they may not be able to afford imports of food, so they might still be relying on locally produced food. So if population outstrips the ability to produce food, you've got problems. With water, it's a similar issue, only water is harder to produce through human effort than food is. A lot of the time, water just depends on the climate and the weather. Unfortunately for the world right now, a lot of the countries with the fastest population growths, places like Bangladesh or say Nigeria right now, also have either polluted water or serious potential for drought. Similar things happening in parts of China as well, in California. At least California, though, is rich enough that it can afford to deal with its water problem, but other places may not be able to. When you have this kind of population growth, you get an unbalanced population distribution. And that might mean that there are, say, every adult couple, say, that's having children, maybe they have 6 or 7 kids. And that means you're going to get a very large number of children who can't work to produce food usually, or at least don't produce much food, compared to the number of adults who are producing things. And one of the ways that we look at these population distributions are by using what are called population pyramids. Those are these little graphs we see below us. And so, for example, the one on the left is a population pyramid of Guatemala. Now, Guatemala is still in the stage of the demographic transition where its population is increasing quickly. So, as you can see, the bars extend to the right in red for the number of females in the population, and to the left in blue for the number of males. So the farther out they are this way, the bigger the population. And the bottom lines are for your youngest, in this case 0 to 4 years old, then 5 to 9 years old, and so on going up. So it gives you, in a brief look, a kind of explanation of the way that the population of a country is structured. So looking at Guatemala, you can see that there are a lot of young people. People under 14, people say under 20, are a very large part of the population, both male and female. And then, there are much fewer people, say, in the prime of their working lives or retired. Now that's a population that's relatively early in the demographic transition. You could look at a country like on the right, the U.S. Currently. The U.S. has a much more balanced population distribution. So, they're about, for any 5-year age group, going on up through age ranges until, a certain number of people start, say, dying off after you get to 60. Things are pretty balanced. So you don't have a lot of problems with there being, say, too many children for the adults to provide for. Now that's when you have very quick population growth. On the other hand, if a country is in stage 5 of the demographic transition, they have negative population growth, meaning the population actually decreases. This also causes problems because there could be too many retirees who aren't working, but they still need to be fed, they need to be cared for, and so on and so on. Well, that's going to fall on the people in the prime part of their working lives, which means that Taxes are probably going to go up because you've got a lot of people who aren't working and need to be cared for, maybe by the government. It means that the economy is going to shift, and you're going to have a lot more, say, home health care aides, more doctors, and so on. Fewer teachers, which is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you feel about your teachers. As in terms of the economy as a whole, you also businesses will have problems because they won't be able to find people to fill their jobs. There just aren't enough people in the prime of their life to do work. These are a pair of Japanese women, and Japan is experiencing some of the most intense negative population growth of any country. And they've come up with a solution that most countries haven't quite gotten into yet, which is robots. But we'll deal with that in some future lecture. The more common way of dealing with the age imbalance is potentially to recruit workers who are young adults who are able to work, and to recruit these people from poorer countries who would like to move to a wealthier country for the economic opportunity. And this can, in some ways, solve your economic problems, but it also may create kind of a cultural tension because the older, the retired population feels often like its culture is being replaced by the newcomers. And to some extent, Japan has seen this, and there's a lot of controversy about this in Japan because it wants to keep its culture while still bringing in foreign people to do jobs. So looking at these population pyramids, you see the U.S., same pyramid on the right, relatively stable or relatively balanced, and on the left is Japan. And as you can see, Japan has the opposite of Guatemala, with not very many children at all compared to, say, middle-aged people, and this goes for men and women. And on the other side of that, a lot more retired people relative to other countries. For instance, you can see how much longer Japanese people seem to live than Americans. So Japan is definitely facing that issue, or that set of issues. In terms of worldwide population distribution, here we're not talking about by age, but we're talking about geographically, where people live. Most people are kind of packed into a small amount of land area. You start with the fact that 30 or so percent only of the Earth's surface is actually land as opposed to ocean, and add to that most of that 30% or so of land is not very suitable for people to live in. It's either too cold, too hot, too mountainous, too dry, which means that most of Earth's population is crowded into only about 30% of its land area. You've got a satellite photo of the Earth at night, and to some extent this reflects industrialization because it's showing the light that big cities are giving off. But it also does show you population patterns. There's not a lot of people right here, right there, and there. I'm not sure why there's so many lights out in the Australian outback. That's kind of strange. But much of the world is relatively unlit at night. When we're talking about how crowded an area is, though, we want to talk about population density. And we've talked about density before in terms of air molecules. It's the same thing with people. Basically, some density in this sense means crowdedness, and lack of density it means somewhere sparsely populated. Two examples of population density are Jamaica, which is a little small island with a good number of people, and is very densely populated, 640 or so people per square mile. Canada, on the other hand, it has a larger population than Jamaica, but it also is almost pushing 1,000 times smaller, or Canada's 1,000 times or so larger than Jamaica. So its population density is much more kind of attractive, maybe. Then again, maybe you like to live in big cities with people everywhere. Urbanization, the final population process we're going to talk about in this lecture. Urbanization is the process of people moving from the countryside, from farms, from rural areas, to cities or urban areas. And it goes hand in hand with industrialization, the creation of factories, and the switchover of the economy from being based on farms to being based on either factory work or trade or service industries, that kind of thing. It goes hand in hand again with the demographic transition, often because as the population grows quickly in the second stage of the demographic transition, people who need land to farm are going to find they don't have a lot of options because there's too many people, not enough farm to go around. So they really have no other choice than to go to cities and look for work there. And once they get to the cities, they can find jobs again in trade, manufacturing, or the service industries. Service industries are things that don't actually produce physical goods, but are like doing something for someone. Walking their dog, serving them coffee, that kind of thing is part of the service industry. And urbanization has in recent decades has really transformed, especially places like Latin America, Africa, and Asia that are still maybe in stage 2, maybe getting towards stage 3 of the demographic transition. And this now that all continents have seen a lot of urbanization, more than half of the world's population actually lives in cities, which is, in terms of how things have been throughout history, really strange and really new. And here you have a Latin American kind of mega city with a kind of a slum growing around a very modern sky-risey city center. Whew, it's a lot to talk about. Good job. We are done with this lecture.